The U.S. just cut off military aid to Ukraine. Cyber Command reportedly halted operations against Russia. Is America shifting away from Europe and toward Russia? This could change global alliances in ways preppers need to watch. Welcome to Preppers News, where we cover news and global events with a prepper's perspective. I use a computer-generated voice in these videos because my own is difficult to understand due to an injury, but the information is all real. Recent decisions by the U.S. government suggest a shift in foreign policy that could have major consequences. The apparent cooling of relations with Ukraine and Europe, combined with moves that benefit Russia, raise serious questions. We're breaking down what's happening, why it matters, and what could be coming next. The U.S. has been a major financial and military backer of Ukraine for years, but that support has now come to a sudden halt. President Trump has announced a total pause on aid to Ukraine, signaling a major shift in U.S. policy. The decision follows a tense Oval Office meeting between Trump, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, and Vice President JD Vance. Trump and Vance accused Zelenskyy of being ungrateful and unwilling to pursue peace negotiations with Russia. The discussion turned confrontational, and shortly after, the administration announced that all U.S. military aid to Ukraine would be suspended until Zelenskyy demonstrates a stronger commitment to peace talks. In response, European leaders have stepped up their support for Ukraine. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer recently hosted a defense summit in London, where he pledged a $2 billion air defense missile deal to bolster Ukraine's defenses. Meanwhile, some European leaders are working on a peace plan for Ukraine, aiming to present it to the U.S. administration in hopes of influencing its stance. With the U.S. pulling back, Ukraine faces a significant reduction in military aid at a critical moment in the war. Russia stands to gain from this shift, while European allies are now under pressure to fill the gap. The fallout has been swift, with growing concerns over NATO unity and the future of Western support for Ukraine. This raises major questions. Was this an intentional step toward de-escalation, or is the U.S. shifting its alliances? And more importantly, what happens next? Reports suggest another major shift in U.S. policy. Cyber Command has been ordered to halt offensive operations against Russia. This directive, reportedly coming from the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, marks a stark change from previous U.S. strategy. Cyber warfare has been a critical tool in the conflict, used to disrupt Russian military networks and counter Russian cyber threats. By ceasing these operations, the U.S. is effectively removing a key form of pressure on Russia. The timing of this decision raises questions. With military aid to Ukraine suspended and cyber operations against Russia halted, the U.S. appears to be pulling back from direct confrontation. Is this part of a larger strategy, or is Washington preparing for a different kind of geopolitical shift? Europe has relied on the U.S. for military and financial support, particularly in backing Ukraine against Russia. But with America stepping back, NATO allies may be left scrambling to adjust. Some European leaders have already signaled that they can no longer count on Washington support. The UK and other European nations have stepped up their own aid packages for Ukraine, but without U.S. backing, their ability to sustain long-term support is uncertain. This shift could push Europe toward greater military independence. Some nations are already discussing strengthening their own defense industries and forming new alliances. If NATO weakens as a result, it could have serious consequences, not just for Europe, but for global stability. The bigger question remains, is the U.S. signaling to Europe that it needs to handle its own security? Or is this a step toward a broader realignment of alliances? The U.S. has not openly declared support for Russia, but its recent actions suggest a shift in priorities. With military aid to Ukraine halted and cyber operations against Russia suspended, the pressure on Moscow is easing. Some argue this is a tactical move, one that allows the U.S. to shift focus toward China, which many in Washington see as a greater long-term threat. Others believe it signals a fundamental change in America's geopolitical strategy, one that could reshape alliances worldwide. Meanwhile, Russia has seized on the moment, using the situation to accuse Ukraine and its allies of prolonging the war. The Kremlin has also been strengthening ties with countries like China, Iran, and North Korea, raising concerns about a growing anti-Western alliance. For preppers, this shift in U.S. foreign policy could have far-reaching consequences. If NATO weakens or fractures, global stability could decline, increasing the risk of new conflicts. A stronger Russia, emboldened by reduced Western opposition, may push its influence further, creating potential flashpoints in Eastern Europe and beyond. Economic impacts are another concern. If tensions rise between the US and its European allies, trade relationships could suffer. Supply chains, particularly for energy, raw materials, and key imports, may be affected. This could lead to price spikes or shortages, especially in industries reliant on European and Ukrainian resources. Domestically, shifts in foreign policy often signal broader changes. A more isolationist stance from the US could mean reduced overseas military involvement, but also a shift in defense priorities at home. Preppers should watch for changes in military budgets, potential draft discussions, or shifts in government focus from global to internal stability. As the situation develops, it's important to stay informed. This is not just about Ukraine or Russia. It's about the direction the US is taking on the global stage and how that might affect supply chains, security, and economic stability for ordinary Americans. This situation is still unfolding, and the implications for global stability, NATO, and US foreign policy remain uncertain. With military aid to Ukraine suspended and cyber operations against Russia halted, the US appears to be shifting its stance in ways that could have long-term consequences. Europe and Canada are stepping up, but whether they can sustain Ukraine's defense without US support is unclear. Meanwhile, Russia is taking advantage of the moment, strengthening its position and deepening its alliances with other anti-Western nations. What do you think? Is this a necessary shift in US foreign policy, or is it a dangerous realignment? Could this change global alliances in ways we haven't seen before? Let us know in the comments. Make sure to like and subscribe to stay informed on the latest developments. Thanks for watching Preppers News and global events with a prepper's perspective. See you next time.